This topic has a lot of different aspects to it, and this is the topic of patent ownership and assignment. So there are at least a few things that you should know about patent ownership and assignment, and we're going to talk about those now. If you've ever been an employee, if you're an engineer or scientist and you've been an employee of a company, you've most likely been subjected to an employment agreement, and within the terms of that employment agreement, there's very likely been what's called an obligation to assign inventions. So if you work for a corporate entity, for a business, and they're doing research and development, or whether it be software development or product development, and there's a potentiality there for patentable subject matter, if you're an employee, and it's possible that you might be creating patentable subject matter, then your employer is going to want you to assign those inventions to them so that they have ownership of those inventions. And the way they do that is by having, as I mentioned here, an initial employment agreement that creates an obligation for you to assign your inventions. And by the way, this could also be the case for written works. If you're doing written work, then your employment agreement probably will also state that any written work that you create would be a work made for hire, and that the copyright in those written works or artistic works of any kind would be owned by the business, by the corporate entity or by the business entity. So in terms of patents, the second step that usually occurs is that if you do create inventive subject matter and it does become patentable subject matter that's filed in a patent application, then the business entity will also have you execute what's called an assignment. And an assignment is a contract, and the assignment contract basically is equal to a transfer of patent ownership. If you create an invention on the job and you have this type of employment agreement that requires you to assign, your employer is going to ask you to execute an assignment document that says that patent application number, whatever that application number is, you're assigning it to the corporation, and basically you're transferring all of your ownership rights to the corporation. Now, you're still an inventor. You'll be named as an inventor on the patent application, but you won't have any ownership rights. The ownership rights will be owned by the business. So the business will have the right to license that patent and do whatever they want with it, sell it, license it. And so the business entity becomes the owner of the patents that you're creating as an employee. Now, from the standpoint of you as an entrepreneur, if you're an entrepreneur or you're a business owner yourself, well, you're going to want to make sure that you have these types of things in place for your business. So if you have a business entity, and it doesn't matter what that business entity is, whether it be a corporation, an LLC, partnership, whatever business entity you decide to create. And by the way, if you're interested in knowing more about these types of business entities or a little bit more information, take a look at my video here about corporations and LLCs. You're going to want to have your employees execute an employment agreement that requires them to assign inventions to your business entity. You're going to want your business to own any of the inventions created by your employees in the course of their daily work. So you're going to want to have these employment agreements in place. And if you do file patent applications, you're going to want to have your inventors execute assignments that are assigning the patent rights to your business entity. So that's an important thing to know as a business owner or an entrepreneur, where you've got people working for you that are creating patentable or potentially patentable subject matter. Now, the other thing to know is, in the situation where you might have a portfolio of patents and you're licensing those, some people are of the opinion that they want to license their patents through a business entity that they create rather than through themselves as an individual. There's an important subtle point to understand about that. If you create a business entity and you enter into a license agreement for patents on which, let's say you're the inventor, and you enter into a licensing agreement licensing those patents, and you sign as the corporate entity, as let's say you sign as the chief technical officer of your business entity, whatever that entity might be, the patent ownership has to be in the name of the business entity and not you as an individual. So that's another contractual thing that needs to be taken care of before you could license patents to another party through a business entity. In other words, If you're the inventor on your patents, then you as an inventor would have to execute an assignment contract transferring the ownership from yourself as an individual inventor to your business entity. Your business entity then would become the owner of those patents. The business entity can then enter into transactions with those patents, such as licensing agreements. It needs to be understood that setting up a business entity to license your patents requires that you, if you're the individual inventor, assign those patent rights to the business entity. You would no longer own the patent rights as an individual. Your business entity would become the owner of the patent rights. One other brief point is that you can have multiple assignees. So just as you could have joint inventors, if you had joint inventors on a patent application and that patent application issues to a granted patent, then the joint inventors would be joint owners of that patent. Likewise, you can have joint assignees. So there could be multiple entities, multiple business entities that are joint assignees that have joint ownership over a patent, just as joint inventors can have joint ownership over a patent. So there are different scenarios that can occur. An assignment is a contract, and under contract law, you can do business in just about any way that you'd like to do business, as long as it's not illegal or fraudulent or violates any statutes of a state or of the United States. You can do business in a contract in any way you want. So you can have multiple assignees in an assignment contract. You can have percentages of ownership in an assignment contract, or however it makes sense for you to make that business deal. At the end of the day, an assignment is just a business transaction. It's a contractual business transaction that transfers ownership of a patent.